Oops, sorry. Almost fast enough, but not quite. Connor wanted some pets before I closed the door and started my stream. She's very demanding of attention. In any case, hello and welcome. No matter where you are, whatever time it is, it's obviously bedtime. I'm obvious here to read to you today. Read some Baudelaire and some Arabian Nights. Hey Panda, no bread today though. I had bread earlier. I had naan, but no bread right now. Tea though, tea for sure. Oh my god, Gecko! Gecko's here. Gecko's been MIA for a few days. Ah! No, don't run away, T. Oops. There's now T all over my mouse pad. Yeesh. Yes, you are alive. I'm excited because I didn't know if you were. I was uncertain. All right. Well, speaking of Kana, a amusing story for you about the Kana, who's a very big butthead. So, the other day, Kana came up, jumped up next to me to snuggle with me, and laid her head on my cheek, like snuggled. And it was so cute. It was adorable. And my best friend saw this, and she was like, oh, it's cute. And then Kana belched right in my nose. And it was the most horrific, god-awful, demonic foulness that I have smelled in a long time. Right into my nose, and it was warm and it stuck to my face. And my best friend lost her shit and died. And she laughed for like 10 minutes to the point that she was sobbing that it hurts as she laughed. Because she said my face as I went from the, oh, it's cute, to the surprise and shock, and then horror and revulsion, and then still somehow surprised and revolted. And apparently this was the best thing ever to her, because she literally laughed at me for 10 minutes straight. So, while I do love Kana, she is a butthead. It was gross. Apparently Vela is now dying of laughter too, but I thought you all might enjoy a tale of the Kana shenanigans. So gross. It stuck to my face. Why? I told her she wasn't allowed any more treats for the next day. None. Nothing weird, no human foods, so that we would not repeat the awfulness. I told her that she had to close the hell mouth that existed inside of her before she could have more treats. So far, it seems to have worked. Also, we have gotten a bunch more followers since our last stream, so let's give a quick thank you to our new followers. We have, wow, a lot. Okay, so we've got Glasshole, Doridius, Suncown, Gianicus, Karab, Black Moon, Blue Mist, Chips and Guacamole, and Berohara. So thank you all of you for the follow. I hope you check out the stream. It was in between streams, so I didn't get to thank you live, but I'm really glad you found something you liked and decided to follow, and I hope you continue to join us for reading. We are currently going to be reading Arabian Nights with a little bit of Baudelaire first. Friday, I am trying to decide what we're going to read. We just finished Frankenstein, and the payoff for that final speech was incredible. That was amazing. I was kind of debating whether we wanted to... You do? Cool. Whether we wanted to continue with the whole like monster theme, because I've got both Invisible Man and Dracula here next to me, or we could read Arabian Nights some more. I did get a request for a really cool old story, Journey to the West. But there are copyright concerns with the translation that was linked. So I'm going to see what I can do about finding one I can read. Might just try to get away with it. I don't know. We'll see. But for now, let's switch over to some nifty visuals. Read some Baudelaire. But not in French. All right, a bit of a longer one this time. And this one's actually dedicated to T.S. Eliot. So I wanted to read Practical Cats to you guys. And Wasteland. Wasteland's really cool too. But Practical Cats is still under copyright. Right, but it's a copy of a 2012 translation, which is my concern. It's a little fuzzy there because even if an original work is very clearly in public view, the translation can still be under copyright, which is, I don't know. I there's a lot about copyright law that I personally don't agree with and find really appalling. I mean, it is one thing for the original creator and author to derive the benefits of their work, and even for like their immediate family. It is quite another for corporations to continue profiting from a work that they had no part whatsoever in for decades or even centuries after the author's death and the death of everyone who ever possibly knew them. And at the same time, translation is not easy. Especially for literature or poetry. And there is a creative aspect to that too. So I don't know. Conflicted. This is called The Voyage. It's from Death and the Flowers of Evil by Charles Baudelaire. For the boy playing with his globe and stamps, the world is equal to his appetite. How grand the world in the blaze of the lamps, now petty in tomorrow's small dry light. One morning we lift anchor, full of brave prejudices, prospects, ingenuity. We swing with the velvet swell of the wave. Our infinite is rocked by the fixed sea. Some wish to fly a cheapness they detest, others their cradle's terror. Others stand with their binoculars on a woman's breast, reptilian Circe with her junk and wand. Not to be turned to reptiles, such men daze themselves with space, light, and the burning sky. Cold toughens them, they bronze in the sun's blaze, and dry the sores of their debauchery. But the true voyagers are those who move simply to move, like lost balloons. Their heart is some old motor thudding in one groove. It says its single phrase, "Let us depart." They are like conscripts, lusting for the guns. Our sciences have never learned to tag their projects and designs. Enormous, vague hopes grease the wheels of these automatons. We imitate, oh horror, tops and bulls in their eternal waltzing marathon. Even in sleep, our fever whips and rolls like a black angel flogging the brute sun. Strange sport, where destination has no place or name, and may be anywhere we choose. Where man, committed to his endless race, runs like a madman diving for repose. Our soul is a three-master seeking port. A voice from starboard shouts, "We're at the dock." Another, more elated, cries from port, "Here's dancing, gin and girls. Balls, it's a rock." The islands sighted by the lookout seem the Eldorados promised us last night. Imagination wakes from its drugged dream, sees only ledges in the morning light. Poor lovers of exotic Indias, shall we throw you in chains or in the sea? Sailors discovering new Americas, who drown in a mirage of agony. The worn-out sponge, who scuffles through our slums, sees whiskey, paradise, and liberty. Wherever oil lamps shine in furnished rooms, we see blue grottos, Caesar, and Capri. Stunningly simple tourists, your pursuit is written in the teardrops in your eyes. Spread out the packing cases of your loot, your azure sapphires made of seas and skies. We want to break the boredom of our jails and cross the oceans without oars or steam. Give us vision to stretch our minds like sails, the blue, exotic shoreline of your dream. Tell us, what have you seen? We've seen the stars, a wave or two. We've also seen some sand. Although we peer through telescopes and spars, we're often deadly bored as you on land. The shine of sunlight on the violet sea, the roar of cities when the sun goes down. These stir our hearts with restless energy. We worship the Indian Ocean, where we drown. No old chateau or shrine besieged by crowds of crippled pilgrims sets our souls on fire. As these chance countries gathered from the clouds, our hearts are always anxious with desire. Desire, that great elm fertilized by lust, gives its old body when the heaven warms, its bark that winters in old age and crust. Green branches draw the sun into its arms. Why are you always growing taller, tree, oh longer lived than cypress? Yet we took one or two sketches for your picture book, brothers who sell your souls for novelty. We have salaamed to pagan gods with horns, entered shrines peopled by a galaxy of Buddhas, Slavic saints, and unicorns. So rich Rothschild must dream of bankruptcy. Priest robes that scattered solid golden flakes, dancers with tattooed bellies and behinds, charmers supported by braziers of snakes. Yes, and what else? Oh, trivial childish minds, you've missed the more important things that we were forced to learn against our will. We bend from top to bottom of the ladder and see only the pageant of immortal sin. Their women, servile, peacock-tailed and coarse, marry for money and love without disgust. Horny, pot-bellied tyrants stuffed on lust. Slaves, the sewer in which their gutter pours. Old maids who weep, playboys who live each hour, state banquets loaded with hot sauces, blood and trash, ministers sterilized by dreams of power, workers who love their brutalizing lash, and everywhere religions like our own, all storming heaven, propped by saints who reign like sybarites on beds of nails and frown, all searching for some orgiastic pain. Many. Hey, Fancy Fig, thank you for the follow. Many, self-drunk, are lying in the mud. Mad now as they have always been, they roll in torment, screaming to the throne of God. My image and my Lord, I hate your soul. And others, dedicated without hope, flee the dull herd. Each, locked in his own world, hides in his ivory tower of art and dope. This is the daily news from the whole world. How sour the knowledge travelers bring away, the world's monotonous and small. We see ourselves today, tomorrow, yesterday, an oasis of horror in sands of ennui. Shall we move or rest? Rest if you can rest, move if you must. One runs, but others drop and trick their vigilant antagonist. Time is a runner who can never stop. The wandering Jew or Christ's apostles, yet nothing's enough. No knife goes through the ribs of this Rotarius throwing out his net. Others can kill and never leave their cribs. And even when time's heel is on our throat, we still can hope, still cry, on, let's go. Just as we once took passage on the boat for China, shivering as we felt the blow. So we now set our sails for the Dead Sea, light-hearted as the youngest traveler. If you look seaward, traveler, you will see a spectre rise and hear it sing. Stop here and eat my lotus flowers. Here is where they're sold. Here are the fabulous fruits. Look, my boughs bend. Eat yourself sick on knowledge. Here we hold time in our hands. It never has to end. We know the accents of this ghost by heart. Our comrade spreads his arms across the seas. On, Orestes, sail and feast your heart. Here's Clytemnestra. Once we kissed her knees. It's time. Old captain, lift anchor. Sink. The land rots. We shall sail into the night. If now the sky and sea are black as ink, our hearts, as you must know, are filled with light. Only when we drink poison are we well. We want this fire so burns our brain tissue to drown in the abyss. Heaven or hell, who cares? Through the unknown, we'll find the new. And that was The Voyage, Charles Baudelaire, Death from Flowers of Evil. It's a longer one, so we're just going to do that one before we get started with Arabian Nights. Chips and guacamole, thank you. I really appreciate it. I'm glad you enjoyed the voice, and you're very welcome for the reading. I hope it gives you a little bit of peace and enjoyment and time out from all the struggles in the world right now. Let's see. We were reading the story of Aladdin and the Wonderful Lamp from the Arabian Nights, which was, surprise, surprise, a little bit different than the Disney version. And he had just ordered the genie to build a palace fit for his bride, the Princess Budira Boudoir. Said, let it be built of porphyry, jasper, agate, lapis lazuli, and the finest marble of various colors. On the roof of the palace, built a large, dome-crowned hall, having 4 equal fronts, and instead of bricks, let the walls be formed of layers of massive gold and silver, laid alternately. Let each front contain 6 windows. The lattices of these, except one which must be left unfinished, must be so enriched with diamonds, rubies, and emeralds that they shall exceed everything of the kind ever seen in the world. There must also be an inner and outer court in front of the palace, and a spacious garden. But, above all things, provide and fill an ample treasure house, well supplied with gold and silver. Let nothing be lacking in the kitchens and storehouses, and let the stables be filled with the best horses. Finally, see that there is a royal staff of servants. Go, execute my orders. It was about the hour of sunset when Aladdin gave these orders, and the next morning, before break of day, the genie presented himself and said, Sir, your palace is finished. At a word from Aladdin, the genie carried him to the palace, and led him through all the apartments, all of which, as well as the servants, delighted him. The genie then showed him the treasury, which was opened by a treasurer, where Aladdin saw heaps of purses of different sizes, piled up to the top of the ceiling and disposed in most excellent order. The genie thence led him to the stables, where he showed him some of the finest horses in the world, and the grooms busy in dressing them. From thence they went to the storehouses, which were filled with all things necessary, both for food and ornament. When Aladdin had thoroughly examined the palace, he said, "Genie, no one can be better satisfied than I am. There is only one thing wanting. That is, a carpet of fine velvet for the princess to walk upon from the Sultan's palace here." The genie immediately disappeared, and Aladdin saw what he desired executed in an instant. The genie then returned and carried him home before the gates of the Sultan's palace were opened. When the Sultan's porters came to open the gates, they were amazed to find a magnificent palace erected, and to see a carpet of velvet spread from the grand entrance. They immediately informed the Grand Vizier, who hastened to tell the Sultan. "It must be Aladdin's palace," exclaimed the Sultan, "which I gave him leave to build. He has done this as a surprise for me, to show what can be done in one night." When Aladdin had been conveyed home, he requested his mother to go to the Princess Buddir al Buddoor to inform her that the palace would be ready for her reception that evening. She at once set out, attended by her women slaves. The widow was sitting with the princess when the Sultan came in. He was much surprised to see the change that had taken place in her, and was greatly pleased. Aladdin had meanwhile set out to his new home, being careful to take the lamp and the ring, both of which had served him in such good stead. Great were the rejoicings and loud the sound of music when the Princess Buddir al Buddoor set out from the Sultan's palace in the evening. A wonderful procession attended her to the door of Aladdin's palace, where he stood ready to receive her with all honors. He conducted her into a large hall, the wealth of which astonished her beyond measure. And then the festivities were kept up until a late hour. The next morning, as soon as he was dressed, Aladdin set out to invite the Sultan and his court to come to his palace. The Sultan willingly consented, and attended by his Grand Vizier and all the great lords of his court, he accompanied Aladdin. The nearer the Sultan approached Aladdin's palace, the more he was struck with its beauty. But when he came into the hall and saw the windows, enriched with diamonds, rubies, emeralds, all large, perfect stones, he was so much surprised that he remained for some time motionless. "Son," said the Sultan, "this hall is the most worthy of admiration of any in the world. There is only one thing that surprises me, which is to find one of the windows unfinished." "Sire," answered Aladdin, "the omission was by design, since I wish that your majesty should have the glory of finishing this hall." "I take it kindly," replied the Sultan, "and will give orders about it immediately." When the Sultan rose from the repast that had been prepared, he was informed that the jewelers and goldsmiths attended. Thereupon he returned to the hall and showed them the window which was unfinished. "I sent for you," said he, "to fit up this window in as great perfection as the rest, and make all the dispatch that you can." The jewelers and goldsmiths examined the 23 windows with great attention, and after they had consulted together to know which each could furnish, they returned and presented themselves before the Sultan, whose principal jeweler, undertaking to speak for the rest, said, "Sire, we are all willing to exert our utmost care and industry to obey your majesty, but among us all we cannot furnish jewels enough for so great a work." "I have more than necessary," said the Sultan. "Come to my palace, and you shall choose what may answer your purpose." When the Sultan returned to his palace, he ordered his jewels to be brought out, and the jewelers took a great quantity, particularly those Aladdin had made him a present of, which they soon used without making any great advance in their work. They came again several times for more, and in a month's time had not finished half their work. In short, they used all the jewels the Sultan had, and borrowed of the Vizier, but yet the work was not half done. Aladdin, who knew that all the Sultan's endeavors to make this window like the rest were in vain, sent for the jewelers and goldsmiths, and not only commanded them to desist from their work, but ordered them to undo what they had begun, and to carry all their jewels back to the Sultan and to the Vizier. They undid in a few hours what they had been 6 weeks about, and retired, leaving Aladdin alone in the hall. He took the lamp, which he carried about him, rubbed it, and presently the genie appeared. "Genie," said Aladdin, I ordered thee to leave one of the 24 windows of this hall imperfect, and thou hast executed my commands punctually. Now I would have thee make it like the rest." The genie immediately disappeared. Aladdin went out of the hall, and, returning soon after, found the window as he wished it to be, like the others. In the meantime, the jewelers and goldsmiths repaired to the palace and were introduced into the Sultan's presence. The chief jeweler presented the precious stones which he had brought back. The Sultan asked them if Aladdin had given them any reason for so doing, and they, answering that he had given them none, he ordered a horse to be brought, which he mounted and rode to his son-in-law's palace, with some few attendants on foot. Aladdin met him at the gate, and instead of answering his question, led him to the great hall. Here the Sultan was much surprised to find the window finished just like the others. He fancied at first that he had mistaken the window, but having examined all the others, he found that it had been completed in a few minutes, whereas the jewelers had spent weeks upon it without finishing the work. "My son," said he, "what a man you are to do such surprising things, always in the twinkling of an eye. There is not your equal in the world. The more I know, the more I admire you." Aladdin did not confine himself to his palace, but took care to show himself once or twice a week in the town by going sometimes to one mosque and sometimes to another, to prayers or to visit the Grand Vizier or the principal lords of the court. Every time he went out, he caused 2 slaves, who walked by the side of his horse, to throw handfuls of money among the people as he passed through the streets and squares. This generosity gained him the love and blessings of the people, and it was common for them to swear by his head. Thus he won the affections of the people, and was more beloved than the Sultan himself. Aladdin had conducted himself in this manner several years, when the African magician recalled him to his recollection in Africa, and though he thought him dead in the cave where he had left him, he resolved to find out for certain. After a long and careful course of magical inquiries, he discovered that Aladdin had escaped and lived in great splendor, all of which he owed to the wonderful lamp. Directly the magician found this out, he set out in hot haste for the capital of China, and when he arrived, he went to a khan where he rested after his long journey. He made inquiries which revealed to him Aladdin's enormous wealth, and heard of all his charities and of the magnificent palace he had built. The magician, when he saw the palace, knew that none but genii could have erected it, and he was exceedingly annoyed to think how he had been worsted. He returned to the khan, determined to find out where the lamp was kept, and by the magic knowledge he possessed, he was enabled to discover what he wanted to know. There, to his great delight, he learned that the lamp was in the palace, not, as he feared, about Aladdin's person. "Now," said he, "I shall have the lamp, and will be revenged upon this fellow, who shall be degraded to his original mean station in life." The magician also learned that Aladdin had set out on a hunting expedition 3 days before, which was to last for 8 days. This knowledge was sufficient to enable the magician to carry out his plans, which he straightway did. First, he went to a coppersmith, from whom he purchased 12 lamps, which he put into a basket, and then he set out to Aladdin's palace again. As he drew near, he called out, "Who will change old lamps for new?" The princess happened to hear the cries, though she heard not his words. Curious to learn why the people collected around him, she sent one of her women to inquire what he sold. The slave soon returned, laughing so heartily that the princess was angry. "Madam," said the slave, laughing still, "this fellow has a basket on his arm, full of fine new lamps, asking to change them for old ones. The children and mob, crowding about him so that he can hardly stir, make all the noise they can in derision of him." Another female slave, hearing this, said, "Now you speak of lamps. I know not whether the princess may have observed it, but there is an old one upon a shelf of the prince's robing room, and whoever owns it will not be sorry to find a new one in its stead." The princess, who knew not the value of this lamp, commanded a slave to take it and make the exchange. The slave obeyed, went out of the hall, and no sooner got to the palace gates than he saw the African magician, called to him, and showing him the old lamp, said, "Give me a new lamp for this." The magician never doubted but this was the lamp he wanted. There could be no other such in this palace, where every utensil was gold or silver. He snatched it eagerly out of the slave's hand, and thrusting it as far as he could into his breast, offered him his basket, and bade him choose which he liked best. The slave picked out one, and carried it to the princess. But the exchange was no sooner made than the place rang with the shouts of the children, deriding the magician's folly. The African magician gave everybody leave to laugh as much as he pleased, and as soon as he was out of the square between the two palaces, he hastened down the streets, which were the least frequented. Having no more occasion for his lamps or basket, he set them all down in an alley where nobody saw him. Then going down another street or two, he walked till he came to one of the city gates, and pursuing his way through the suburbs, at length reached a lonely spot, where he passed the remainder of the day. When night came, he pulled the lamp out of his breast and rubbed it. At that summons, the genie appeared and said, "What wouldst thou have? I am ready to obey thee as thy slave, and the slave of all those who have that lamp in their hands, both I and the other slaves of the lamp." "I command thee," replied the magician, "to transport me immediately, and the palace which thou and the other slaves of the lamp have built in the city, with all the people in it, to Africa." The genie made no reply, but immediately transported him and the palace entire to the spot whither he was desired to convey it. The sultan was so surprised at not finding the palace upon which he used to gaze that he called to the grand vizier to order it to him in order that he might give his opinion. The grand vizier, who feared and disliked Aladdin, was not slow to advise the sultan to have him arrested. He would have had him put to death, but that the people threatened to rebel if this was done. The sultan in his wrath sent for Aladdin and said to him, "Where is your palace?" "Indeed," answered Aladdin, "I cannot tell you, but pray, sire, give me 40 days, and if at the end of that time I do not restore it to its place, I offer my head as forfeit." Aladdin went out of the sultan's presence in great humiliation, so that he durst not lift up his eyes. The principal officers of the court, who had all professed themselves his friends, turned their backs to avoid seeing him. He was quite distraught, and wandered about the city vainly asking if anyone had seen his palace. Having spent 3 days in this way, he at length went into the country, determined to end his life. As he approached the river in which he intended to drown himself, he slipped and fell, and in falling rubbed the magic ring which he still wore, but of which he had forgotten the power. Immediately the genie whom he had seen in the cave appeared, and said, "What wouldst thou? I am thy slave, the slave of the ring." "Genie," said Aladdin, agreeably surprised at this unexpected help, "transport me immediately to the spot whither my palace has been removed." No sooner were these words spoken than Aladdin found himself in Africa, beside his own palace, under the princess's window. It so happened that shortly thereafter the Princess Buddir Boudoir came to the window, and seeing Aladdin was overcome with joy. "Come," she cried, "to the private door and hasten to me." Aladdin's joy was no less than that of the princess. He tenderly embraced her, and then asked, "Tell me, what has become of the lamp that stood on the shelf in my room?" "Alas," replied the princess, "I foolishly changed it for a new one, not knowing its power, and the next morning found myself in this place, which I am told is Africa." "Then, since we are in Africa," said Aladdin, "I know that this must be the doing of the African magician. Can you tell me where he keeps the lamp?" The princess told him that the magician always carried the lamp in the bosom of his dress, because he had shown it to her. "Then," said Aladdin, "we may yet punish this wicked magician. Let the private door be opened to me directly when I return, for the first thing is to secure the lamp." Aladdin set out, and soon descried a wayfarer who was overjoyed to change clothes with him, and went to an apothecary and asked for a certain powder, which was very costly. The apothecary looked askance, but Aladdin showed him a purse full of gold, and demanded half a dram, with which he returned quickly to the palace. He entered by the private door. Hastening to the princess's apartment, he said to her, "When the magician comes to visit you, You must be most gracious to him. Entertain him as becomes you, and ere he leaves, request him to drink to you. Then give him this cup, in which there is a powder that will send him to sleep. While he sleeps, we can secure the lamp, whose slaves will do our bidding, and we shall be restored to China once more. The princess most carefully performed all that Aladdin had directed, and when the magician came as usual to pay her a visit, he was agreeably surprised to find her waiting to receive him with a smile. At the close of the evening, during which the princess had tried all she could to please him, she asked him to exchange cups with her, and giving the signal, had the drugged cup brought, which she gave to the magician. He drank it out of compliment to the princess to the very last drop, when he fell backward, lifeless on the sofa, and the princess gave the signal which she arranged with Aladdin. As soon as Aladdin entered the hall, the princess rose from her seat and ran overjoyed to embrace him, but he stopped her and said, "Princess, it is not yet time. Oblige me by retiring to your apartment, and let me be left alone a moment, while I endeavor to transport you back to China as speedily as you were brought from thence." When the princess and her women were gone out of the hall, Aladdin shut the door, and going directly to the dead body of the magician, opened his vest, took out the lamp, which was carefully wrapped up, as the princess had told him, and unfolding and rubbing it, the genie immediately appeared. "Genie," said Aladdin, "I command thee to transport this palace instantly into China, to the place from whence it was brought hither." Immediately the palace was transported into China, and its removal was only felt by two little shocks, the one when it was lifted up, and the other when it was set down, and both within a very short interval of time. The Sultan, who rose early, looked, as was his wont, in sorrow over the empty space. To his astonishment, he perceived that the palace had been replaced, and he was overjoyed. He at once called for his horse and rode over to the palace to welcome the return of his daughter and Aladdin. Aladdin, who had foreseen this visit, had risen early and was ready to receive the Sultan in the hall, clothed in a most magnificent garment. He led the Sultan straight to the princess's apartment, where the happy father fondly embraced his child. "Son," said he, turning to Aladdin, "forgive the harshness of my conduct toward you, which was inspired by paternal affection." "Sire," replied Aladdin, "you are not to blame. That base magician was alone the cause of all my troubles." Although the African magician was dead, he had a younger brother who was equally skillful as a necromancer, and even surpassed him in villainy and pernicious designs. These two brothers did not live together, but each year they communicated by means of their magic arts. Not having received any tidings of his elder brother, the younger one made an astrological inquiry, by which he discovered that the elder had been poisoned. By a further investigation, he discovered that he was buried in the capital of China, near the dwelling of the man who had murdered him, who he learned was married to the Sultan's daughter. He at once set out for the capital of China to avenge his brother's death, and after a long and fatiguing journey reached the city, where he soon discovered that Aladdin was the poisoner whom he sought. He took a lodging in a khan, where he heard of the virtue and piety of a woman called Fatima, who had retired from the world, and of the miracles she wrought. As he fancied that this woman might be serviceable to him in the project he had conceived, he requested to be informed more particularly who that holy woman was, and what sort of miracles she performed. "What?" said the person whom he addressed. "Have you never seen or heard of her? She is the admiration of the whole town for her fasting, her austerities, and her exemplary life. Except Mondays and Fridays, she never stirs out of her little cell, and on those days on which she comes into the town, she does an infinite deal of good. There is not a person but is cured by her laying her hand upon them." That very night, the magician went to Fatima's cell, and having murdered her, he put on her clothes and went to the palace of Aladdin, bent upon revenge. As soon as the people saw the holy woman, as they imagined him to be, they presently gathered about him in a great crowd. Some begged his blessing, others kissed his hand, and others, more reserved, only the hem of his garment, while others stooped for him to lay his hands upon them, which he did, muttering some words in form of prayer, and in short, counterfeited so well that everybody took him for the holy woman. Though the progress was slow, the magician at length reached the square in front of the palace. The princess, happening to hear that the holy woman was there, and being desirous of seeing her, sent one of her slaves to bid her enter. The people, seeing the slave approach, fell back to allow him to approach Fatima. "Holy woman," said he, "the princess wishes to see you." "The princess does me too great an honor," replied the false Fatima. "I am ready to obey her command." At the same time, he followed the slave to the palace, greatly delighted at the success of his plot. When they had conversed, the princess said, "My good mother, I have one thing to request, which you must not refuse me. It is to stay with me, that you may edify me with your way of living, and that I may learn from your good example." "Princess," said the counterfeit Fatima, "I beg of you not to ask what I cannot consent to, without neglecting my prayers and devotion." "That shall be no hindrance to you," answered the princess. "I have a great many apartments unoccupied. You shall choose which you like best, and have as much liberty to perform your devotions as if you were in your own cell." The magician, who desired nothing more than to introduce himself into the palace, where it would be a much easier matter for him to execute his designs, said, after a pause, "Princess, whatever resolution a poor wretched woman as I may have made to renounce the pomp and grandeur of this world, I dare not presume to oppose the will and commands of so pious and charitable a princess." He accordingly followed her with a tottering gait. Afterward, the princess requested him to dine with her, but he, considering that he should then be obliged to show his face, which he had always taken care to conceal, and fearing that the princess should find out that he was not Fatima, begged of her earnestly to excuse him, telling her that he never ate anything but bread and dried fruits, and desiring to eat that slight repast in his own apartment. The princess granted his request, saying, "You may be as free here, good mother, as if you were in your own cell. I will order you a dinner, but remember, I expect you as soon as you have finished your repast." After the princess had dined, and the false Fatima had been informed by one of the slaves that she had risen from table, he failed not to wait upon her. "My good mother," said the princess, "I am overjoyed to have the company of so holy a woman as yourself, who will confer a blessing upon this palace. But now I am speaking of the palace. Pray, how do you like it? And before I show it all to you, tell me first what you think of this hall." Upon this question, the counterfeit Fatima surveyed the hall from one end to the other, and said, "As far as such a solitary being as I am, who am unacquainted with what the world calls beautiful, can judge, this hall is truly admirable and most beautiful. There wants but one thing." "What is that, good mother?" demanded the princess. "Tell me, I conjure you. For my part, I always believed and have heard say it wanted nothing, but if it does, it shall be supplied." "Princess," said the false Fatima, with great dissimulation, "forgive me the liberty I have taken, but my opinion is, if it can be of any importance, that if a roc's egg were hung up in the middle of the dome, this hall would have no parallel in the 4 quarters of the world, and your palace would be the wonder of the universe." "My good mother," said the princess, "what bird is a rock, and where may one get an egg?" "Princess," replied the pretended Fatima, "it is a bird of prodigious size, which inhabits the summit of Mount Caucasus. The architect who built your palace can get you one." The princess often thought of the roc's egg, and it annoyed her to think that anything was lacking from her palace. So when Aladdin returned, she received him coldly and said, "I always believed that our palace was the most superb, magnificent, and complete in the world. But I will tell you now what I find fault with upon examining the hall of 24 windows. Do you not think with me that it would be complete if a roc's egg were hung up in the midst of the dome?" "Princess," replied Aladdin, "it is enough that you think there wants such an ornament. You shall see by the diligence used to supply that deficiency that there is nothing which I would not do for your sake." Aladdin left the Princess Buddir al Boudoir that moment, and went up into the hall of 24 windows, where, pulling out of his bosom the lamp which, after the danger he had been exposed to, he always carried about him, he rubbed it, upon which the genie immediately appeared. "Genie," said Aladdin, "there wants a roc's egg to be hung up in the midst of the dome. I command thee, in the name of this lamp, to repair the deficiency." Aladdin had no sooner pronounced these words than the genie gave so loud and terrible a cry that the hall shook, and Aladdin could scarcely stand upright. "What? Wretch!" said the genie, in a voice that would have made the most undaunted man tremble. "Is it not enough that I and my companions have done everything for you, but you, by an unheard of ingratitude, must command me to bring my master and hang him up in the midst of this dome? This attempt deserves that you, your wife, and your palace should be immediately reduced to ashes. But you are lucky that this request does not come from yourself. Know then that the true author is the brother of the African magician, your enemy, whom you have destroyed as he deserved. He is now in your palace, disguised in the habit of the holy woman Fatima, whom he has murdered. And it is he who has suggested to your wife to make this pernicious demand. His design is to kill you. Therefore, take care of yourself." After these words, the genie disappeared. Aladdin quickly resolved what to do. He returned to the princess and pretended to be suddenly taken ill. The princess, remembering Fatima's power, at once sent for her, and she came with all speed. In the meantime, the princess explained how the holy woman came into the palace. And when she appeared, Aladdin smiled and bade her welcome at so opportune a moment. "Surely, good woman," said he, "you can cure me as you have others." The counterfeit Fatima advanced toward him, with his hand all the time on a dagger concealed in his girdle under his gown. Aladdin perceived this, and snatched the weapon from his hand, and slew him on the spot. "My dear husband, what have you done?" cried the princess in surprise. "You have killed the holy woman." "No, my princess," answered Aladdin with emotion. "I have not killed Fatima, but a villain who would have assassinated me if I had not prevented him. This wicked wretch," added he, uncovering his face, "is brother to the African magician." Thus was Aladdin delivered from the persecution of two brothers who were magicians. Within a few years afterward, the Sultan died at a good old age, and as he left no male children, the Princess Buddir al Boudoir succeeded him, and she and Aladdin reigned together many years and left a numerous and illustrious posterity. So, a little different than the Disney one, but, they still lived happily ever after. Of course, the princess in this one is kind of a vain and materialistic woman. Aladdin's not really much of a prize either. Personally, if I was the princess and I had been tricked into murdering someone with poison, I think I'd be a little pissed off at him. "Hey, Sparky, I'm glad you made it. Wasn't sure if you were going to make it today." Time to ditch the hoodie. Now, in the illustrations, the magician did have a bird, although it appeared to be a crow or a raven, rather than Gilbert Godfrey the parrot. But he did have a bird. The Disney one, it also conflated the magician and the Grand Vizier. No worries. We read The Voyage by Charles Baudelaire to get started. I also told a story that you should probably listen to the VOD for, about the shenanigans that the dog Kana got up to and her demonic belches. I technically had more than two. Only two had speaking parts, but the genie of the lamp specifically stated that there were multitudes there. Yes, definitely chemical warfare on her part. Shenanigans. Oh. By the way, for our new friends, there is a Discord. Let me get the Discord link up. If you want to follow that Discord link and join us, and there are channels for book requests and where we talk about the books, some of the games the community plays, gives you a chance to hang out and interact with others in the bedtime community. We'd love to have you join and participate. So follow that link if you can. There's also links to the YouTube channel and other places on there, and a links channel. But I hope to get to meet you and talk to you there. Hear some of the books you'd like to read. This is a good time to request new ones because we have 2 books that we just finished. We finished the subscriber reading, which is our Thursday reading for those that support the stream on Patreon. And then where we just finished The Hobbit. And then our Friday stream, we were reading Frankenstein, which we just finished last Friday. So we'll be picking a new book for that too. So it's a great time to ask for, an old favorite of yours or something you've always wanted to try but weren't quite sure when you'd have the time to read yourself. You can hear my wonderful voice reading it to you. Well, I hope you think it's a wonderful voice, or at least marginally tolerable. We'll go for that. All right, so we are about 3/4 of the way through. Yeah, 3/4 of the way through or so. Maybe more like 80%. We actually only have 2 more stories left. Well, thank you, Gecko. Thank you, Sparky. So, last 2 stories in the Arabian Nights. So, we'll have another slot for a new book as well. And this is the story of Abu Hassan, or The Sleeper Awakened. It's Talar roll. Thanks, Vela. Thank you ever so. I feel the love. In the reign of the Caliph Harun al-Rashid, there lived at Baghdad a very rich merchant who had but one son, whom he named Abu Hassan, and educated with great strictness. When his son was 30 years old, the merchant, dying, left him his sole heir and master of great riches, amassed together by much frugality and close application to business. Abu Hassan, whose father had always forbidden him to be extravagant, longed to spend money, and resolved to make a reputation for lavish generosity. To this end, he divided his riches into 2 parts. With one half, he bought houses in town and land in the country, with the resolution never to touch the income of his real estate, which was considerable enough to live upon very handsomely, but to lay it all by as he received it. With the other half, which consisted of ready money, he designed to make himself amends for the time he had lost by the severe restraint in which his father had always kept him. With this intent, Abu Hassan formed a society of youths of his own age and condition, who thought of nothing but how to make time pass agreeably. He gave magnificent entertainments, and spared neither trouble nor expense to make them celebrated throughout the city. So enormous was the outlay that in a year the money he had set apart for the purpose was spent, and he was forced to descend. Words. And he was forced to desist. As soon as he discontinued keeping the stable, his friends forsook him. Whenever they saw him, they avoided him. If by chance he met any of them and went to stop them, they always excused themselves on some pretext or other. Abu Hassan was more affected by this behavior of his late friends, who had forsaken him so basely and ungratefully, after all the protestations that they made of inviolable attachment, than by all the loss of the money he had so foolishly squandered. He went, melancholy and thoughtful, his countenance expressive of deep vexation, into his mother's apartment, and sat down on the end of a sofa at a distance from her. "What is the matter with you, son?" said his mother, seeing him thus depressed. "Why are you so altered, so dejected, and so different from yourself?" At these words, Abu Hassan melted into tears, and in the midst of his sighs exclaimed, "Ah, mother, I see at last how insupportable poverty must be. I am sensible that it deprives us of joy, just as the setting of the sun does of light. As poverty makes us forget all the commendations passed upon us before our fall, it makes us endeavor to conceal ourselves, and spend our nights in tears and sorrow. In short, a poor man is looked upon, both by friends and relations, as a stranger. You know, mother, how I have treated my friends for this year past. I have entertained them with all imaginable generosity, till I have spent all my money, and now they have left me, when they suppose I can treat them no longer. For my real estate, I thank heaven for having given me grace to keep the oath I made not to encroach upon that. I shall now know how to use what is left. But I will, however, see how far my friends, who deserve not that I should call them so, will carry their ingratitude. I will go to them one after another, and when I have represented to them what I have done on their account, ask them to make up a sum of money to relieve me, merely to try if I can find any sentiment of gratitude remaining in them." Not one of his companions was moved by the arguments which the afflicted Abu Hassan used to persuade them, and he had the mortification to find that many of them told him plainly they did not know him. He returned home full of melancholy, and going into his mother's apartment said, "Ah, madam, instead of friends I have found none but perfidious, ungrateful wretches who deserve not my friendship. I renounce them, and promise you I will never see them more." He resolved to be as good as his word, and took every precaution to avoid falling again into the inconvenience which his former prodigality had occasioned, taking an oath never to give an inhabitant of Baghdad any entertainment while he lived. He drew the strong box into which he had put the rents received from his estates from the recess where he had placed it in reserve, put it in the room of that he had emptied, and resolved to take out every day no more than was sufficient to defray the expense of a single person to sup with him, who, according to the oath he had taken, was not of Baghdad, but a stranger arrived in the city the same day, and who must take his leave of him the following morning. This sounds a little bit like the Sultan's oath to marry for but a single night. Although, a little less off with her head. In accordance with this plan, Abu Hassan took care every morning to provide whatever was necessary, and toward the close of the evening went and sat at the end of Baghdad Bridge. And as soon as he saw a stranger, he accosted him civilly and invited him to sup and lodge with him that night. And after having informed him of the law he had imposed upon himself, conducted him to his house. The repast with which Abu Hassan regaled his guests was not costly, but well dressed, with plenty of good wine, and generally lasted till the night was pretty far advanced. Instead of entertaining his guests with the affairs of state, his family, or business, as is too frequent, he conversed on various agreeable subjects. He was naturally of so gay and pleasant a temper that he could give the most agreeable turns to every subject, and make the most melancholy persons merry. When he sent away his guests the next morning, he always said, "God preserve you from all sorrow wherever you go. When I invited you yesterday to come and sup with me, I informed you of the law I have imposed on myself. Therefore, do not take it ill if I tell you that we must never see one another again, nor drink together, either at home or anywhere else, for reasons best known to myself. So God conduct you." One day, when Abu Hassan was waiting at the bridge as usual, The Caliph, Harun al-Rashid, attended by one slave, chanced to come by in the garb of a merchant of Mosul. Abu Hassan, taking him for such, saluted him courteously and said, "Sir, I congratulate you on your happy arrival in Baghdad. I beg you to do me the honor to sup with me and repose yourself at my house for this night, after the fatigue of your journey." He then told him of his custom of entertaining the first stranger with whom he met. The Caliph found something so odd and singular in Abu Hassan's whim that he was very desirous to know the cause. So he told him that he could not better merit a civility, which he did not expect as a stranger, than by accepting the obliging offer made him, that he had only to lead the way, and he was ready to follow him. Abu Hassan, little guessing the rank of his guest, treated him as an equal, and gave him the usual good but plain supper of which he himself partook. After they had supped and washed their hands, Abu Hassan placed wine upon the table, and requested the Caliph to drink, which he did, expressing himself well pleased with the wine. He also listened with satisfaction to the young man's easy and cultured conversation. And at last, in a burst of confidence, Abu Hassan told the Caliph his history, which interested him greatly. "You are indeed a fortunate man," said he, "to have been warned in time, and I highly commend your conduct." Thus they sat, drinking and talking of indifferent subjects, till the night was pretty far advanced. Then the Caliph said, "Before we part, pray tell me, is there any way in which I can be of service to you? Speak freely and open your mind, for though I am but a merchant, it may be in my power to oblige you myself, or by some friend." To these offers of the Caliph, Abu Hassan, taking him still for a Mosul merchant, replied, "I am very well persuaded, sir, that it is not out of compliment that you make me these generous tenders. But upon the word of an honest man, I assure you, I have nothing that troubles me, no business, nor desires, and I ask nothing of anybody. I have not the least ambition, as I told you before, and am satisfied with my condition. Therefore, I can only thank you for your obliging proffers, and the honor you have done me in condescending to partake of my frugal fare. Yet I must tell you," pursued Abu Hassan, "there is one thing that gives me uneasiness, without, however, disturbing my rest. You must know the town of Baghdad is divided into 4 quarters, in each of which there is a mosque with an imam to perform service at certain hours, at the head of the quarter which assembles there. The imam of the division I live in is a surly curmudgeon, of an austere countenance, and the greatest hypocrite in the world. 4 old men of this neighborhood, who are people of the same stamp, meet regularly every day at this imam's house. There they vent their slander, calumny, and malice against me and the whole quarter. Were I but in a position to punish them, I would do so, and I wish the Caliph knew of their doings, for he is just and would stop them. Would that I had the Caliph's power for one day, then I would order the imam to receive 400 lashes, and each of the 4 men who abet his actions should receive 100, as the reward of their iniquities." The Caliph immediately decided upon a plan by which he could enable Abu Hassan's wish to be realized. He took the bottle and poured out a glass of wine, drank it off to his host's health, and then filling the other, put into it artfully a little opiate powder which he had about him, and giving it to Abu Hassan, said, "You have taken the pains to fill for me all night, and it is the least I can do to save you the trouble once. I beg you to take this glass and drink it for my sake." Abu Hassan took the glass, and to show his guest with how much pleasure he received the honor, drank it off at once. Directly he swallowed it, the powder took effect, and he fell into a sound sleep. The Caliph commanded the slave he had brought with him to take Abu Hassan upon his back, and follow him, but to be sure to observe the house, that he might know it again. In this manner the Caliph, followed by the slave with his sleeping load, went out of the house, but without shutting the door after him as he had been desired. He went directly to his palace, and by a private door into his own apartment, where the officers of his chamber were in waiting, whom he ordered to undress Abu Hassan and put him into his bed. This they immediately performed. The Caliph then sent for all the officers and ladies to the palace, and said to them, "I would have all those whose business it is to attend my levee wait tomorrow morning upon the man who lies in my bed. Pay the same respect to him as to myself, and obey him in whatever he may command. Let him be refused nothing that he asks, and be addressed and answered as if he were the commander of the faithful. In short, I expect that you attend to him as the true Caliph, without regarding me, and disobey him not in the least circumstance." The officers and ladies, who understood that the Caliph meant to divert himself, answered by low bows, and then withdrew, every one preparing to contribute to the best of his power to perform his respective part adroitly. The Caliph next sent for his Grand Vizier. "Ja'far," said he, "I have sent for you to instruct you, and to prevent your being surprised tomorrow, when you come to audience, at seeing this man seated on my throne in the royal robes. Accost him with the same reverence and respect that you pay to myself. Observe and punctually execute whatever he bids you do, the same as if I commanded you. He will exercise great liberality, and commission you with the distribution of it. Do all he commands, even if his liberality should extend so far as to empty all the coffers in my treasury. And remember to acquaint all my emirs and the officers without the palace, to pay him the same honor at audience as to myself, and to carry on the matter so well that he may not perceive the least thing that may interrupt the diversion which I design myself." After the Grand Vizier had retired, the Caliph went to bed in another apartment, and gave Mesrar, the chief of his eunuchs, the orders which he was to execute, that everything should succeed as he intended, so that he might see how Abu Hassan would use the power and authority of the Caliph for the short time he had desired to have it. Above all, he charged him not to fail to awake him at the usual hour, before he awakened Abu Hassan, because he wished to be present when he arose. Mesrar failed not to do as the Caliph had commanded, and as soon as the Caliph went into the room where Abu Hassan lay, he placed himself in a little closet, from which he could see all that passed. All the officers and ladies who were to attend Abu Hassan's levee went in at the same time, and took their posts according to their rank, ready to acquit themselves of their respective duties as if the Caliph himself had been going to rise. As it was just daybreak, and time to prepare for the morning prayer before sunrise, the officers who stood nearest to the head of the bed put a sponge steeped in vinegar to Abu Hassan's nose, which immediately awoke with a start. He was greatly surprised to find himself in a large room, magnificently furnished, the ceiling of which was finely painted in arabesque, adorned with bases of gold and silver, and the floor covered with a rich silk tapestry. After casting his eyes on the covering of the bed, he perceived it was cloth of gold, richly embossed with pearls and diamonds, and near the bed lay, on a cushion, a habit of tissue embroidered with jewels, with a caliph's turban. At the sight of these glittering objects, Abu Hassan was in the most inexpressible amazement, and looked upon all he saw as a dream. Yet a dream he wished it were not to be so. No, I would imagine it's not. Also, waking up after having been drugged in a strange bed, not the best way to wake up either. "So," said he to himself, "I am Caliph, but," added he, recollecting himself, "it is only a dream, the effect of the wish I entertained my guest with last night." And then he turned himself about and shut his eyes to sleep. At the same time the slave said, very respectfully, "Commander of the faithful, it is time for your majesty to rise to prayers. The morning begins to advance." At the sound of this voice, Abu Hassan sat up and said to himself, "This cannot be a dream." He rubbed his eyes to make sure he was awake, and when he opened them, the sun shone full in at the chamber window. And at that instant, Mesrar came in, prostrated himself before Abu Hassan, and said, "Commander of the faithful, your majesty will excuse me for representing to you that you used not to rise so late, and at the time of prayer is over. If your majesty has not had a bad night, it is time to ascend your throne and hold a council as usual. All your generals, governors, and other officers of state wait your presence in the council hall." By this discourse, Abu Hassan was persuaded that he was neither asleep nor in a dream, but at the same time was not less embarrassed and confused under his uncertainty as to what steps to take. At last, looking earnestly at Mesrour, he said to him in a serious tone, "Whom is it you speak to, and call the commander of the faithful? I do not know you, and you must mistake me for somebody else." Any person but Mesrour would have been puzzled by these questions of Abu Hassan, but he had been so well instructed by the Caliph that he played his part admirably. "My imperial lord and master," said he, "your majesty only speaks thus to try me. Is not your majesty the commander of the faithful, monarch of the world from east to west, and vicar on earth to the prophet sent of God? Mesrour, your poor slave, has not forgotten you, after so many years that he has had the honor and happiness to serve and pay his respects to your majesty. He would think himself the most unhappy of men if he has incurred your displeasure, and begs of you most humbly to remove his fears, but had rather supposed that you had been disturbed by some troublesome dream." Abu Hassan burst out laughing at these words, and fell backward upon the bolster, which pleased the Caliph so much that he would have laughed as loudly himself if he had not been afraid of putting a stop to the pleasant scene he had promised himself. Abu Hassan, when he had tired himself with laughing, sat up again, and speaking to a little boy that stood by him, said, "Hark ye, tell me who I am." "Sire," answered the little boy modestly, "your majesty is the commander of the believers, and God's vicar on earth." "That is not true, you little slave," said Abu Hassan. Then he called the lady that stood nearest to him. "Come hither, fair one," said he, holding out his hand. "Bite the end of my finger, that I may feel whether I am asleep or awake." The lady, who knew the Caliph was witnessing all that passed, was overjoyed to have an opportunity of showing her power of diverting him, went with a grave countenance, and putting his finger between her teeth, bit it so hard that she put him to violent pain. Snatching his hand quickly back again, he said, "I find that I am awake, and not asleep. But by what miracle have I become Caliph in a night's time? This is certainly the most strange and surprising event in the world." Then addressing himself to the same lady, he said, "I conjure you, by the protection of God, in whom you trust as well as I, not to hide the truth from me. Am I really the commander of the faithful?" "It is so true," answered the lady, "that we, who are your slaves, are amazed to find that you will not believe yourself to be so." "You are a deceiver," replied Abu Hassan. "I know very well who I am." More puzzled than ever, Abu Hassan permitted Mesrour to assist him to rise, and he submitted to be dressed by the slaves without offering any resistance. When this task was completed, the Grand Vizier led him through the double row of curtains to the council hall, where he was conducted with all the splendor of royal pomp to the throne. Having reached the throne, Mesrour gave him his arm to lean upon, and another officer on the other side did the same, and by their aid Abu Hassan mounted the steps and sat down amidst the acclamations of the officers. The Caliph had, meanwhile, followed, and taken up his station in a place from which he could see without being seen. What pleased him highly was to see Abu Hassan fill his throne with almost as much gravity as himself. As soon as Abu Hassan was seated upon the throne, the Grand Vizier came forward, and making a low obeisance, said, "Commander of the faithful, God shower down blessings on your majesty in this life, receive you into his paradise in the other world, and confound your enemies." Abu Hassan, who began by this time to believe that he really was Caliph, answered the Grand Vizier what business there was to transact. "Commander of the faithful," replied the Grand Vizier, "the officers of your council wait without till your majesty gives them leave to pay their accustomed respects." Abu Hassan immediately ordered the door to be opened so that the officers might enter, and he bowed to them regally as they prostrated themselves before taking their seats. After this ceremony, the business of the day was transacted. The Grand Vizier, standing before the throne, made his report, and the Caliph, who watched everything, greatly admired the wit with which Abu Hassan called the Qadi to him, and said, "Go to a mosque in a certain quarter, wherein there is an old imam. Seize him, and 4 old men who abet his weakness and bastinado them. Give the Imam 400 and each of the others 100 strokes. After that, mount them all 5, clothed in rags on camels, with their faces to the tails, and lead them through the whole city with a crier before them, who shall proclaim with a loud voice, "This is the punishment of all those who are meddlesome." Command them also to quit the quarter forever. The Qadi bowed to the Grand Vizier and withdrew to execute the order, and in a short time returned to report that his duty was discharged. The Caliph was highly pleased at the firmness with which this order was given, and perceived that Abu Hassan was resolved not to lose the opportunity of punishing the Imam and the other 4 old hypocrites of his quarter. In the meantime, the Grand Vizier went on with his report, and had just finished when the judge of the police came back from executing his commission. He approached the throne with the usual ceremony and said, "Commander of the Faithful, I found the Imam and his 4 companions in the mosque, which your Majesty pointed out, and as a proof that I have punctually obeyed your commands, I have brought an instrument signed by the principal inhabitants of the ward." At the same time he pulled a paper out of his bosom and presented it to the pretended Caliph. Abu Hassan, then addressing himself to the Grand Vizier, said, "Go to the High Treasurer for a purse of 1,000 pieces of gold, and carry it to the mother of one Abu Hassan, who lives in the same quarter to which I sent the judge of the police. Go, and return immediately." The Grand Vizier, after laying his hand upon his head, and prostrating himself before the throne, went to the High Treasurer, who gave him the money which he offered a slave to take, and to follow him to Abu Hassan's mother, to whom he gave it, saying only, "The Caliph makes you this present." She received it with the greatest surprise imaginable. The business of the day being finished, the council withdrew, and Abu Hassan descended from the throne, and was conducted into the dining hall, where he fared sumptuously, while the musicians played and danced before him. And all the while 7 very beautiful ladies stood near and fanned him. Abu Hassan was charmed by everything, not least by the beauty of the ladies who attended him. When he looked at them attentively, he said that he believed one of them was enough to give him all the air he wanted, and would have 6 of the ladies sit at table with him, 3 on his right hand and 3 on his left. The 6 ladies obeyed, and Abu Hassan, taking notice that out of respect they did not eat, helped them himself and invited them to eat in the most pressing and obliging terms. Afterward he asked their names, which they told him were Alabaster Neck, Coral Lips, Moonface, Sunshine, Eyes Delight, Heart's Delight, and she who fanned him was Sugar Cane. Those sound like stripper names, frankly. The many soft things he said upon their names showed him to be a man of sprightly wit, and it is not to be conceived how much it increased the esteem which the Caliph, who saw everything, had already conceived for him. After this repast, Abu Hassan was conducted into another hall, where dessert was spread, and where 7 other ladies, more beautiful than the others, stood ready to fan him. Abu Hassan, however, would not suffer them to do so, but bade them sit near him that he might enjoy their society. The Caliph was delighted to hear the ready wit with which he amused the ladies, and knew him to be a man of no ordinary merits. Made up bullshit. Yeah. By this time, the day beginning to close, Abu Hassan was conducted into a hall, much more superbly and magnificently furnished, lighted with wax and 7 gold lustres, with which gave a splendid light. There he saw 7 large silver flagons, full of the choicest wines, and by them 7 crystal glasses of the finest workmanship. Hitherto Abu Hassan had drunk nothing but water, according to the custom observed at Baghdad, from the highest to the lowest, and at the Caliph's court never to drink wine till the evening. As soon as Abu Hassan entered the hall, he went to the table, sat down, and was a long time in a kind of ecstasy at the sight which surrounded him, and which was much more beautiful than anything he had beheld before. Taking by the hand the lady who sat on the right next to him, he made her sit down, and presenting her with a cake, asked her name. Commander of the Faithful, said the lady, I am called Cluster of Pearls. No name, replied Abu Hassan, could have more properly expressed your worth. And indeed, your teeth exceed the finest pearls. Cluster of Pearls, added he, since that is your name, oblige me with a glass of wine from your fair hand. The lady brought him a glass of wine, which she presented to him with a pleasant air. Then Abu Hassan drank with each of the 7 ladies, and when he had toasted them severally, Cluster of Pearls went to the buffet, poured out a glass of wine, and, putting in a pinch of the same powder the Caliph had used the night before, presented it to Abu Hassan. Commander of the Faithful, said she, I beg of your majesty to take this glass of wine, and before you drink it, do me the favor to hear a song I have composed today, in which I flatter myself will not displease you. When the lady had concluded, Abu Hassan drank off his glass, and turned his head toward her to give her those praises which he thought she merited, but was prevented by the opiate, which operated so suddenly that his mouth was instantly wide open, and his eyes close shut. And dropping his head on the cushions, he slept as profoundly as the day before, when the Caliph had given him the powder. One of the ladies stood ready to catch the glass, which fell out of his hand. And then the Caliph, who enjoyed greater satisfaction in this scene than he had promised himself, and was all along a spectator of what had passed, came into the hall to them, overjoyed at the success of his plan. He ordered Abu Hassan to be dressed in his own clothes, and carried back to his house by the slave who had brought him, charging him to lay him on a sofa in the same room, without making any noise, and to leave the door open when he came away. Abu Hassan slept till very late the next morning. When the effect of the powder had worn off, he awoke, opened his eyes, and finding himself at home, was in the utmost surprise. Cluster of Pearls, Morning Star, Coral Lips, Moon Face, cried he, calling the ladies of the palace by their names as he remembered them. Where are you? Come hither. Abu Hassan called so loudly that his mother, who was in her own apartment, heard him, and running to him because of the noise he made, said, What ails you, son? What has happened to you? At these words Abu Hassan lifted up his head and looked haughtily at his mother, and said, Good woman, who is it you call son? Why, you, answered his mother very mildly. Are you not Abu Hassan, my son? It is strange that you have forgotten yourself so soon. I, your son, replied Abu Hassan. You know not what you say. I am the commander of the faithful, and you cannot make me believe otherwise. Abu Hassan's mother, who was convinced that he was suffering from a mental disorder, tried to change the conversation, and to do this she related how the Imam had been punished on the previous day. Abu Hassan no sooner heard this statement than he cried out, I am neither thy son nor Abu Hassan, but certainly the commander of the believers. I cannot doubt after what you have told me. Know that it was by my order the Imam and the 4 sheiks were punished, and all your arguments cannot convince me of the contrary. His mother vainly tried to soothe his troubled mind, but her remonstrances only enraged Abu Hassan the more, and he was so provoked at his mother that, regardless of her tears, he took hold of a cane and ran to his mother in great fury, and in a threatening manner that would have frightened anyone but a mother so partial to him, said, Tell me directly who I am. Well, I mean, he also got drugged multiple times to the degree that he passed right out. So, could be that he's still tripping balls. I do not believe, son, replied she, looking at him tenderly and without fear, that you are so abandoned by God as to not know your mother, who brought you into the world. You are indeed my son, Abu Hassan, and are much in the wrong to arrogate to yourself the title which belongs only to our sovereign lord, the Caliph Harun al-Rashid, especially after the noble and generous present the monarch made us yesterday. At these words, Abu Hassan grew quite mad. The circumstance of the Caliph's liberality persuaded him more than ever that he was the Caliph, remembering that he sent the vizier. And in his frenzy he beat his mother with the cane, telling her the while that it was he who sent the money. The poor mother, who could not have thought that her son would have come so soon from words to blows, called out for help so loudly that the neighbors ran in to her assistance. Abu Hassan continued to beat her at every stroke, asking her if he was the commander of the faithful, to which she always answered tenderly that he was her son. At the sound of her cries, the neighbors came running in, and upon hearing Abu Hassan proclaim himself as caliph, they no longer doubted but that he was insane. They therefore seized him, and having bound him, carried him to the lunatic asylum, where he was lodged in a grated cell, and here they left him to recover his senses. He received 50 strokes of the bastinado daily to help him to remember that he was not the commander of the faithful, as he maintained. By degrees, those strong and lively ideas which Abu Hassan had entertained, of having been clothed in the caliph's habit, having exercised his authority, and been punctually obeyed and treated like the true caliph, the assurance of which had persuaded him that he was so, began to wear away. He then made up his mind to think of the whole thing as a dream, and to return to his own house in peace. When Abu Hassan's mother came to see him, she found him so much better that she wept for joy. "Indeed, mother," said he, "I cannot understand what has taken place, but I am resolved to regard it all as a very vivid dream, and I beg of you to forgive me for all my ill treatment of you." "My son," cried she, transported with pleasure, "my satisfaction and comfort to hear you talk so reasonably are inexpressible, and it gives me much joy. But I must tell you my opinion of this adventure. The stranger whom you brought home the evening before your illness to sup with you went away without shutting your chamber door after him as you desired, which I believe gave the devil an opportunity to enter and throw you into the horrible illusion you have been in. Therefore, my son, you ought to return God thanks for your deliverance." "I believe that you are right," said he, "and I beg of you to have me released from this place." His mother waited no second asking, but hurried to the keeper, who, having examined Abu Hassan, released him as she desired. Abu Hassan took several days' rest after his return, and then resumed his practice of inviting a stranger to supper. The very first time he went to the bridge, he perceived the merchant who, as he thought, had caused all his troubles coming toward him. Abu Hassan turned away to avoid him, but the merchant would not be put off, and came up to him. "Ho, brother Abu Hassan," said he, "is it you? I greet you. Give me leave to embrace you." "Not I," replied Abu Hassan. "I do not greet you. I will have neither your greeting nor your embraces. Go along with you." The caliph, who had carefully planned the meeting, since he knew that Abu Hassan had returned home, was not to be diverted from his purpose by this rude behavior. He well knew the law Abu Hassan had imposed on himself, never to have commerce again with a stranger he had once entertained, but pretended to be ignorant of it. "Ah, brother Abu Hassan," said he, embracing him, "I do not intend to part with you thus, since I have had the good fortune to meet with you a second time. You must exercise the same hospitality toward me again that you showed me a month ago, when I had the honor to drink with you." Abu Hassan would fain have sent the caliph away, but his efforts to rid himself of his unwelcome presence were futile, and at last he found himself compelled to allow him to accompany him. "But," said he, "since your last visit entailed so much trouble, I must tell you what happened, and beg of you to spare me a repetition." Abu Hassan then related his adventure, and concluded by making the caliph promise to form no more good intentions for his future. "I am satisfied," said he, "and will forgive all that is past." As soon as Abu Hassan entered his house, he called for his mother and for candles, desired his guest to sit down upon a sofa, and then placed himself by him. A little time after, supper was brought up, and they both began to eat without ceremony. When they had done, Abu Hassan's mother cleared the table, set on a small dessert of fruit, wine, and glasses by her son, and then withdrew, and appeared no more. After they had been drinking for some time, the caliph said, "Have you never thought of getting married?" "No," replied Abu Hassan. "I prefer to remain free." "That is not right," continued the caliph. I must find you a lady who will be worthy of your love, and I am sure you will like her." Then, taking Abu Hassan's glass, he put into it a little of the powder, and handed it to his host, filled with wine. "Come," said he, "drink the health of the lady I shall provide for you." Abu Hassan took the glass, laughing, and shaking his head, said, "Be it so. Since you desire it, I cannot be guilty of so great a piece of incivility, nor disoblige a guest of so much merit in such a trifling matter. I will drink the health of the lady you promised me, though I am very well contented as I am, and do not rely on your keeping your word." No sooner had Abu Hassan drunk off his bumper than he was seized with as deep a sleep as before, and the Caliph ordered the same slave to take him and carry him to the palace. The slave obeyed, and the Caliph, who did not intend to send back Abu Hassan as before, shut the door after him, as he had promised, and followed. And we're going to go ahead and close there for today. As the rich dude toys with somebody like he's a performing monkey. Aww. Why, aw, Gecko. I'll hang out in Discord a little bit after I close out the stream. So if any of you want to hang out and chat or whatever, we can do that. Well, I'm glad you were enjoying story time. I want you to enjoy story time. That's like the whole point, right? Yep, cliffhangers for the win. But that just means you all have to come back Saturday for the conclusion of the Arabian Nights, right? So, all right. Well, thank you everyone for those of you who have come and listened, and thank you to the new people who have joined us. And I do hope to see as many of you as I can tomorrow for the subscriber stream, and Friday for the opening of whatever the new book is that we pick. Like I said, if you'd like to pop out some ideas, we have a request channel in the Discord, and I would love to see them. There have been a couple of good ideas already posted, but I am always open to more. And even if I don't get to it this time, it doesn't mean that it won't be read in the future. Look, the 8-ball's trying to distract you. Squirrel! All right. Well, thank you, everyone. And I hope you have a wonderful morning, evening, afternoon, day, whatever it happens to be. And I look forward to seeing you all here tomorrow and the next day and the day after that. All right. Good night.